Thank you all today for joining us for optimized software licensing and utilization for ServiceNow and more. Joining us today from DTech Apps, Mr. David Sandberg, and from Polaris Technology Group, Mr. Norman Moore. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick overview of the organizations who are presenting today. First of all, who is DTech Apps? For those of you who have joined us today and are not familiar with DTech Apps or Discover Technologies, DTech Apps is a ServiceNow partner. We've been building applications on the ServiceNow platform for almost 8 years now. We have a deep history in building out solutions and stories in workflow, and born from a deep experience with SharePoint and the Microsoft platform, we became one of the very first build partners in the ServiceNow ecosystem through our Tasker application. For many people throughout government agencies and large enterprises, they're using Tasker today to manage their day-to-day tasks and applications that require them to record or maintain a chain of command of the activities that they do throughout their day. We created Tasker in conjunction with our friends at ServiceNow and have been delivering that into key agencies. Because we are born from the Microsoft ecosystem and world, we have a deep and rich experience with Microsoft SharePoint, building out solutions for SharePoint, and as a result, we created the Doc Integrator suite. And Doc Integrator has evolved from being a very intuitive and easy to use connector for bringing content from ServiceNow into SharePoint and vice versa. A lot of people use SharePoint as their system of record. And so we developed Doc Integrators to simplify that and have been adding a great amount of functionality into that suite, from expanding its global search capabilities to include Teams, OneDrive, and email. And then more recently, our new DocFlow capability that many people have been adopting into their organizations. We also have Doc Generator, which is part of the Doc Integrator suite now. It's our forms automation tool that makes taking your PDF or Word documents and integrating with ServiceNow data seamlessly so you can remove that human error. And with that, let me hand over the microphone to Mr. Norman Moore, who's going to tell us a little bit about Polaris.
Polaris has been in the ecosystem for about 11 years. The principles of Polaris have been in the market, the industry, for about 30 years. Especially around asset management. So today's conversation will be heavily tailored to the software asset management suite within ServiceNow. But within the Polaris ecosystem, we've completed in excess of 150 plus projects. We have a bench of about 25 to 30 consultants, and we're really focused on solutions. So not only just staff aug, but actually focused on delivering solutions to our customers. So this is just a quick slide deck of our customers that we have delivered solutions to. Many SLED, state and local government, also commercial large enterprises. One enterprise company that we did work with was AT&T. They had 2.2 billion assets that we managed under the CMDB and asset management. So our experience from a asset management and control of those assets within the organization is something that we're very skilled at. One of the benefits of ServiceNow is the ability to manage software and assets, hardware assets across the enterprise. Now, one of the benefits of asset management, other than versus let's say ITSM, is that there's a true return on investment when we talk about software licenses. Many of your organizations out there are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars in software. And our goal is to identify how we can manage that software, the licenses for you, and capture the reuse of those softwares and overall just management of those software. So here is just some views of the industry. As we all know, Gartner, Deloitte, and Flexera, these are companies that make it their business to manage large software spends for a company. So Gartner says a well-organized software management program can save organizations in excess of 30% over the life of their products. So if you think about just managing software from procurement, deployment, recovery, refreshes, there's so many opportunities to save, you know, investments in the software asset management. Deloitte has done their annual review, and they've identified in excess of 25%. And then Flexera is one of ServiceNow competitors, but a very big player in the software asset management world. And on a spend of 75 or $74 million, you can see anywhere from 8 to 10% in savings in excess of $6 million. So there's real return on investment when you start to enter a software asset management program. The other side of that is if we think about software asset management in general, it does require the management of software from an accounting standpoint. So that's why finance usually drives the software management of an organization, and not just IT. IT is the ability to track the software, but the goal here is how do we manage that through finance? So here are some areas of opportunities within organizations. So many of us have really moved to the cloud. So most of our applications are now cloud-based. If we think about Azure, AWS, Salesforce.com, and so forth, there's a lot of software that we're spending every month on a subscription basis. The goal here is we want to control that software, not just assign those licenses, but control them throughout its life cycle. We also have software asset visibility. So if we think about the discovery of those software titles, you're working with hundreds of vendors, many thousands of titles that are being deployed. How do we track all that software? How do we discover it? How do we manage it from deployment to retirement? Automated license optimization. So if we have a well-defined software asset management program, we can start to automate things like request to deployments. So providing a nice catalog for your users, being able to view that catalog, understand the cost of that software license, and then secure it and deploy it automatically. Really taking the manual hands-on deployments and hopefully cutting cost in the maintenance and deployments of those software licenses. Compliance management, this is a really problematic area for many companies. We tend to hold buckets of money quarterly just to manage the true ups that we have or audits that we have with our vendors. So from compliance management, our goal is to identify what your contracts are defined, your entitlements to those contracts, the usage against those contracts. So you stay in compliance. A lot of times we overbuy software just to stay in compliance, but if we can get a tighter site picture of our licenses, we can see tremendous amount of savings from cost avoidance. Cost optimization, software asset workspace. So having one view of all your software and being able to optimize that across the workspace. ServiceNow has deployed many, very cool tools to provide you that capability. Automated workflows. So as you think about the life cycle of software, we want to try to automate the workflows across those software suites. So if we request a AWS environment, what is the lease on that environment? Is it a 6-month lease? Is it a 12-month lease? What happens at the end of that lease period, right? So these are what automated workflows allows us to do, is to automatically identify the process, all the activities, and make sure that the process is enforced. Vendor management, contract renewals. This is another area that a lot of organizations are struggling with. If you think about the renewals of software, oftentimes we get emails from the vendors. At that time, there's a whole bunch of emails that go out throughout the organization to identify who the owner is. Should we renew this software, so forth and so on. That's where ServiceNow can take over the main functions there and also automate the notifications and management and contract renewal process. EOL, end of life and end of support. If we think about the compliance and also the security measures that we have to deploy within software, EOL and EOS is a major process within the organization. Oftentimes we've deployed software that's been in use for 10, 20, sometimes longer years. And we need to understand if it's still being supported. Is it been end of life? And if it has, what is our remediation for that software? And then certificate management. If you think about enterprise organization today, you have thousands of certificates that are managing your internet. If it's your internal websites, if it's your external websites, your partner websites, there's all of these certificate management situations that a site goes down because your certificate has expired. What is the renewals? Oftentimes there's these consolidation of certificate owners and so forth. So how do you manage your certificates across the board? Next slide. So here's just a few areas of savings, if you will, across the software asset management estate. So if we think about well-managed organizations, let's say you purchase somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million in software a year. If we can save, let's say 10% across that $100 million, that's a $10 million cost avoidance for software asset management. So oftentimes we're like, where do we find the money, where the investment for a program like software asset management? This is where we find those business cases. Oftentimes, you're being audited by Adobe, by Microsoft, by Oracle, and each one of these audits alone can be millions of dollars of exposure. So, real immediate cost returns and savings there. Labor savings through process automation. So again, there's a lot of manual install of software because we really don't know the type of software we have, so we haven't built all the packages and so forth. But if we understand the software licenses that we have and we use them across our catalog, we can then automate the request to deployment process and in turn saving on labor and time, right? The other thing that we can do is monitor the usage of that software. And if we find that that software is not being used, let's say, in 3 months or 6 months, we can then send out a notification to the user because we know who the user is because they've requested it through our catalog. And we can then remove that software if we find out that that user is not using that software anymore. So cost recovery of software licenses out there to be reused by the organization. Audit fines and avoidance. We've all been here. Happens every quarter. A new sales rep comes online. They want to do an audit. They want to, retire their quota. You're going to see these audits on a monthly, quarterly, or even yearly basis. So depending on how often you are audited, you'll tend to have some money set aside for these audits. Elimination of redundant software. This is really where we're finding a lot of opportunities within the cloud, or software providers like AWS and Azure. We spin up a lot of environments. They may be temporary environments, dev environments, and so forth. But this is an opportunity that we can reevaluate how we're using Azure, how we're using AWS, and so forth, and really start to tighten the controls of how we're deploying that software. If that means shorter lease times, if that means not deploying data center and standard, maybe it's a situation where we want to manage our own licenses for those servers instead of having the vendors manage it because we can get higher discount rates. So there's a lot of potential savings just in the cloud software management area. And then faster time to value. Again, if we can manage the process, we can automate the process. And I've been at customers where it takes sometimes 2, 3, maybe 4 months to deploy a server, just from the software purchases and securing the hardware and so forth. So if we understand that process, we can take that 3-month time frame down to a week, maybe sometimes days. So there's really value to time value that we can save also within an organization. Next slide. So again, more opportunities. Okay. So if we think about all of the opportunities that you have across your software estate. Oftentimes, when we do our kickoffs and we do our evaluation assessments up front, we immediately identify these areas of opportunities within within your organization, and oftentimes we can set those contracts against those savings. So you may have a renewal with Microsoft coming up. We can help you review that contract. In some cases, help negotiate that contract because we're looking at the usage, we're looking at your spend, and so forth, and we can provide you models and cost models around that you can go back to your supplier and negotiate better terms across that software stack. Um, but as you can see, just again, more of the same, more areas of savings, more opportunities to justify a software asset management program and others. I mean, if we think about procurement, SAM, HAM, we talk about deployments and retirements. We talk about data center management. We talk about disaster recovery. All of that plays into software asset management. If we know what we deployed, we can then manage it for things like software or disaster recovery, so forth and so on. Next slide. So we've done this hundreds of times across a better part of 30 years. And in that, we readily see savings in excess of 10, 15, 20 million dollars across a 2 or 3 year plan. And you'll see that this ROI estimator is infinite, because if you think about the ability to save, let's say, $20 million off your AWS and Azure spend. I have customers that are spending $1 billion with AWS a year. So if you think about being able to save $10 million, $20 million, that's every year that you're avoiding that cost. So the return on investment is literally infinite, because if you didn't have a good software asset management program, every year you're paying that, and you're probably accelerating that spend. So there's no reason not to have a software asset management program. All right. Next slide. Great. So that completes the explanation of why software asset management. What we've done today is we built a demo around software asset management and contract management. So if you think about ServiceNow, we oftentimes talk about attaching contracts to the contract module within ServiceNow, managing the T's and C's in the license module and so forth. But what we don't do is a very good job of managing the document, the actual contract, the negotiations, the red lines. So the nice thing about DTech apps and ServiceNow together is DTech apps allows you to manage the life cycle of that contract from inception all the way to execution. So the red lines, the reviews, the T's and C's, being able to review those T's and C's and then bringing that information back into ServiceNow. The other thing is the ability to review all the different changes over time. So if you think year 1, year 2, year 3, option 4, 5, and 6, how has our contract changed over time? So we can review and view those contracts and make decisions. So it's a very valuable integration between DTech apps and ServiceNow. And I'll turn it over to Dave for the demo.
Actually, before you go there, Norman, there's Delphine
Okay.
has asked a couple questions and then asked a
Great.
third question. So if you just want to have a look at that.
All right. So let me see. This assumes you have only one asset that you are allocating from. How would you auto deploy allocated with when you have 120 titles for a single product such as Acrobat Standard? So this is where within the ServiceNow catalog, we would actually enumerate each one of those titles within ServiceNow, and we could add that to a cart. Today, if you think about your catalog, you probably have a generic catalog. I want something, I want a new computer. But the way that we would deploy your catalog is we would tie that to your suppliers and actually individually bring in those items into the catalog. So you'd have like an Amazon catalog. And within the Amazon catalog, you would have each one of these titles enumerated, and you could specifically add those to the cart. And then based
Yep.
off of that, go ahead. Is there a
Yeah,
question?
it's you got it. But the big question is it's one title with 120 different entitlements.
One
And
title with,
the
so
example is Acrobat Standard from the same supplier. So one title, 120 entitlements
right. So
for a single
and
product.
yeah, so when you say entitlements, there are 100 different combinations, or is there 120 licenses available? If I could get some clarification there.
They have 120 organizations.
120 organizations. Okay. Okay. So on request, we would identify what organization is requesting that, and then that entitlement would be tied to that organization. So you would essentially have 120 different entitlements for that software title. But on the request side, because we know who the requester is, we would know what department or organization that they would be tied to. So that's part of the catalog management. Is we definitely want to look at your catalog and oftentimes integrate with your suppliers like Zones or Insight or CDW, and we bring all of the software into the catalog. On top of that, the nice thing about doing that integration is these suppliers tend to also manage your software licenses. So we can do the integration to their software management tools that they own, and tie that and reconcile that with your ServiceNow solution also.
All right, so we'll transition to the demo. Thank you, Norman, for that overview. My name is David Sandberg, for those that don't know, the solution consultant at DTech Apps. So in today's demo, we're going to see how businesses can optimize software licensing and utilization within the ServiceNow platform. So ultimately, let's not allow the strategic decisions to slip through the cracks. So there's going to be two parts before we hop in. Part one is all about investigation of underutilized licenses and determination of how we can be more effective. So a large priority for many customers is AI today, right? And they're also, a lot of our customers specifically are Microsoft shops. So Microsoft Copilot is a very common occurrence. And with SAM, with software asset management, we have the visibility into our tech expenses. So just a quick overview, right, of software asset management. We're in the details in one of the tab sections. You see all the important metadata associated with Microsoft Copilot. The main thing to note is we have a certain amount of licenses over a certain period of time costing a certain amount of money, right? And as we dig in more, we can see that we are actually underutilizing the licenses for Copilot, so we're paying for them, but we are not utilizing it to the full extent. So since we caught this, we may have the option to decrease the license count for the following year, or maybe allocate these entitlements to different groups in our business. So on one side of that, that's cost savings. On the other side, that's efficiency gains. And as we transfer into the document portion, I said we might have the option because based on the date, we don't know if we can actually change this, right? It might be an auto renewal. So Norman was speaking about this a few moments ago of where the documents live. So some companies that we work with have documents like the contracts, the terms and conditions, living in email. So it's in these disjointed email threads, hard to find the files. Some organizations have them living in ServiceNow against the record, ServiceNow attachments. And there are some challenges with this. So one, storage costs might become an issue, especially as you get an abundance of files. And also in terms of actually interacting with them, you need to download the files, edit them, and upload, right? There is no co-editing in that respect. So the way DTech approaches this is with Doc Integrator, and we'll talk about this in depth. Doc Integrator is the ServiceNow to SharePoint connection. So all of the documents live in SharePoint, but they look like they live in ServiceNow, making all of the IT asset managers' lives easier. As you notice, this is just another tab within the experience, so a very common user experience where for the IT asset manager, they may not even know exactly all the details of where these documents live because it is so easy. So what we're looking at right now are 4 documents, again, living in SharePoint. We leverage all the core capabilities of SharePoint like co-editing and versioning. And these are just some of the metadata that we are exposing on the SharePoint side, but any metadata, any of those columns or fields that are in SharePoint, you can expose within this experience. So when working with a lot of customers, they have documents living on their local desktop, and you can easily bring these in either by choosing the file or dragging and dropping. We're pulling in this file from our local desktop, and what's happening is it's going directly to SharePoint. So it is bypassing ServiceNow, and now it lives however this is configured. Now we have 5 documents. It's living in whatever site, folder, or library that these live in. In terms of going back to the use case, we're trying to evaluate if we can make any amendments to this contract for the next calendar year. So we can see how the documents are associated with the record. We are not hunting for them. And if we want to cancel or amend this contract, just taking a look at some of the information, right? So this is the important part. You must notify 30 days before the contract end renewal date, or it's going to renew. So we know now that it was easy to find this file. We have to notify them 30 days, and hopping back into the details, right, the experience of software asset management, we see we got approached this ahead of time, right? So efficiency, and this allows us now to make those strategic decisions. So at the end of the day, we can decide, do we want to repurpose these licenses or trim our software spend? And the reason we were able to do that, heading back into Doc Integrator, is because everything is centralized, making your lives easier and decreasing the risk of large unnecessary expenses. And a similar front, I was working with a customer a few years ago, and they incurred a $10 million lease because they did not cancel it ahead of time, and it approached that that date, and they had a 3-year renewal for tens of millions of dollars. So how can we try to avoid those situations? And I was going to mention this later, but we can hit on that now, where once you embed or once you license Doc Integrator, it's per user. So once you license it, you can embed it in any and all applications. So right now we're in SAM. You can embed in ITSM, CSM, HRSD, and custom applications on ServiceNow. And we are operating in the modern workspace interface, but in the same vein, you could embed in portal or platform for some other organization.
So as we go through contracts management with software asset management, oftentimes there's multiple versions that we are negotiating with. So Doc Integrator will be able to provide you that level of versioning within the document tool and showing you the different versions and updates to those versions.
Yep, great addition, and we are actually going to cover that. So perfect segue in the next portion.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, thanks for the sneak peek. So in the second part of the demo, it's all about evaluation and approval of net new software. So as an organization, we're evaluating a CRM. Again, all of the important metadata that's associated. This is a very large expense, so we definitely want to make sure all of our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So now we're going to talk again about all of those files, all the documents that live or are associated with this piece of software. Again, in terms of how some customers utilize it today, they start with, having them an email, or they use ServiceNow attachments. We're going to focus on the product of Doc Integrator, again, connecting seamlessly SharePoint and ServiceNow. And the goal here is ServiceNow is the workflow tool, an amazing platform, and SharePoint is a content or document management tool. So we're just bridging the best of both worlds. Again, same interface. We have all of the documents that we're going to interact with, and one of them is going to be digital signatures, and the other one is co-editing. So before we do that, sometimes organizations have files that live in SharePoint, but we're not seeing them right now. So you have the visibility and the capability to easily search against all of your Microsoft suite. So let's say we're looking for a policy document. We can search across SharePoint. We can search across Teams and Outlook as well. So one thing to note, because we are asked this quite frequently, if you can't access something in SharePoint, you cannot see it here. We are not breaking any rules. We're not breaking any of the permissions. And same thing along those lines with Teams and Outlook. These are pulling from the logged in user, so only against their Teams and their Outlook. In terms of the document themselves, without having to navigate through SharePoint, you have the ability to copy this document and bring it into the record that we were just looking at. So a highly utilized functionality called federated search, where you can search across the business and even for knowledge articles. So for those organizations that heavily utilize the knowledge base, you also have that capability from this perspective and the end user in portal. So the two use cases we just mentioned are co-editing. So as we are evaluating this piece of software, maybe we have to provide red lines. So we are leveraging all of the capabilities that SharePoint offers. So co-editing, co-authoring, version history. We can even see Chris is in this document as we speak, adding any comment, red lines again. So just trying to show how we are not changing anything. We are just leveraging the best of both worlds. So that's with Word documents. Same thing applies for any of the documents by just clicking the link. Now, the other piece is digital signatures, so approvals. So once everything is finalized, it's saved as a PDF and goes through the approval process. Some organizations have Adobe Pro licenses or DocuSign that they procured during COVID, so they needed to perform digital signatures. They got those solutions. We're actually able to provide digital signature capability in free Adobe Reader. So we're talking about consolidating software asset management spend. That's just another way to further cut costs. As simple as, this document is a PDF, bring it into free Adobe Reader. This is that final document that needs approval. Read everything, just making sure that everything is up to snuff, and we can provide our digital signatures. So for those organizations in the government that utilize PIV or CACs, because this is Adobe, we support those capabilities as well. We can see that this digital signature was just applied, and what you noted was I did not have to download the document, edit it, and upload. It is all stored in SharePoint and OneDrive. So once we actually go into SharePoint by selecting this document, we see based on the URL, this document lives in SharePoint. As we proceed towards the bottom, this is that digital signature that Adam just applied a few moments ago. So why is that important? It's because we don't need to do that download and upload process. We are always working on the most up-to-date version, and all of this versioning, if you need to revert back to an earlier one, is stored in SharePoint as well. So what we just did was, we digitally signed this document, and we can also move it to another site, library, or folder. And I can provide a practical example, and Norman was speaking about this before. So some organizations have multiple libraries and folders that they want to move files back and forth from. This only has two, so we can see the active documents and completed. Some organizations have three or more where there is something that's actively being worked on, maybe a policy document, so it's work in progress just for a specific group, right? We're leveraging all of SharePoint's permissions. Then those are completed. So these could be those policy documents that are live to the general public, all employees. And one that we commonly see are archived or retired documents. So these are not old versions, these are actually old copies, if you will, of previous policies or terms and conditions. So as Norman was speaking about before, because everything is centralized, you can view and determine, right, what are the differences as opposed to, again, combing through email or spreadsheets trying to find this type of data. So on that note, coming back to our use case, we want to move this file, right, it is now digitally signed. We are adopting this piece of software. We want to move it to the completed documents folder. As simple as that, we bring this over to the new SharePoint library. One thing to note is, again, we are leveraging all of the goodness of SharePoint. So if you do not have the ability to edit, or if you do not have the ability to move the file in SharePoint, you won't be able to do that here, and you would be blocked. See, the benefit is you get all of the goodness of SharePoint without having to navigate through the complexity. So a very simple user experience, right, is that the workhorse behind the system, and a familiar user interface. It is just like all of the other parts of software asset management, and the same applies for anything across the board, right? CSM, FSM, HRSD, or custom apps. So what did we?
I was just going to add, Dave, the nice thing about this integration is I can't tell you how many customers we go to and we start to review their contracts and they're pulling them out of, filing cabinets and so forth, right? So the beauty here is as we start to move you to the doc integrator capabilities, all of your contracts will start to live and breathe in ServiceNow through the doc integrator integration, and future conversations with your vendors, your suppliers, or even other consultants will all be within the ServiceNow tool now.
Yep, great point. And just to conclude, so what did we find? We discovered two use cases. So the first being Copilot, and this is evaluating or looking at your software spend for a current piece of software, or on the Salesforce side, something that we are thinking about procuring. And at the end of the day, this is how organizations can optimize software licensing and utilization on the robust ServiceNow platform. One, cutting costs, and two, increasing efficiency.
Thanks, Dave. I do have a couple questions. I think these are going to be more tailored to Norman versus David, but welcome David to chime in as well. How do you currently track and manage procurement requests, approvals, and your vendor relationships?
Absolutely. So if you think about the life cycle of those contracts, they start with initiation of some vendor communication, so forth and so on. As we deploy procurement in ServiceNow or your own procurement tools, the main idea here is, where does that vendor live, right? If it's in your existing procurement tools, you may have SAP, you may have Coupa, so forth and so on. We would do an integration to those tools. So you would generate the PO within Coupa. At that point, we would then push that PO number within ServiceNow along with all the line item details. And then we would receive those those items at the receiving dock. So we, scan the PO number, pull up that that PO within ServiceNow, and then receive each individual item within that process. Now, if you want to deploy ServiceNow's procurement solution, then we can do other things like vendor scorecards. We can look at supplier fulfillment times. So from request to receive. The other thing is we can start doing things like three-way matching, right? So if you have the PO, the invoice, and the receipt of the asset, we can then initiate the pay portion of the procure to pay process. Some other things that we can do is we can also feed your enterprise asset, fixed asset tool. It may be SAP, so forth, to initiate the depreciation process, or we can also build out the depreciation process within ServiceNow that would show you your schedule of depreciation over the next 5 years for that IT asset, for example. And if you want to expand it further into enterprise assets, we can do depreciation across things like, vehicles and buildings and so forth. And then also tie back maintenance capabilities, RMAs, and so forth. So there's a lot of capabilities within the ServiceNow platform and or integration to the tools that you currently have. Hope I answered the question.
The next one, so we're struggling with software that we're not either using or utilizing. How do we manage that?
Yeah, so ServiceNow has a capability called install conditions. So part of it is understanding what your discovery tools are. If it's SCCM, if it's ServiceNow's discovery, there's a slew of tools out there. But more importantly, understanding, the problem is post, right? So you've already deployed this software. What we want to try to do is initially take a stock of what you have installed, and then we want to compare that to your contracts. So we're going to pull in all those T's and C's and those entitlements into ServiceNow. We're going to take your initial feed of your discovery and we're going to populate the CMDB. We're going to look at all the models across all your software titles to make sure that all the titles are normalized. And then we're going to reconcile that against your entitlements. That'll give us a good baseline. Next, what we want to try to do is actually get in front of it. So instead of post deployment, we're going to get in front of it pre-deployment, and we're going to start working with you on your catalog side of the house, and we're going to start bringing all those enumerated CIs, actually your SKUs, enumerated SKUs into the ServiceNow catalog. And then we're going to start allowing you to request those individual items. And since we know who the requester is, what department, what cost center, and all those things, we're going to be able to bring that and meld that information that you don't have today, by the way. And we're going to provide you a really clear view of who's requesting, purchasing, what departments, and so forth, and then ongoing. So that's how we then match authorized installs versus unauthorized installs. So initially we're going to baseline, and then we're going to get in front of it, and then we're going to start providing you authorized and unauthorized installs.
Okay, and then how do we make sure that those assets are either properly retired or repurposed?
Yes. So there's events that typically happens in an organization, employee termination, refresh cycles, new purchase or upgrades. So what we want to try to do also is not only build out the catalog, but understand the type of events that can affect this software throughout its life cycle. So for example, a refresh event, if you have 10,000 employees, 25% of that, 2,500 employees a year, is going through some refresh cycle, typically every 4 years or so. So that's 2,500 refreshes recovery that we need to reconcile. So part of it is if you're going through refreshes and you're not doing software recovery, you're potentially losing a lot of money on those refreshes. So what we want to try to do is get ahead of that and do a full inventory of what's on those those systems. That can also be data center refreshes, right? And we want to understand what's installed on those systems, and then we want to map that to your software models, and then your software models will then be mapped to your entitlements. So at least we have some way to baseline that. Then post deployment of lifecycle management, we're going to get into the catalog, the request side of the house, and then the deployment side of the house. So we're going to know the actual request and entitlement association up front. Any other questions?
Nope. Just, of course, the love the comment at the end. Of course, leadership's got to agree to remove the software, right?
Yes. And so there's also retirement rules that we can also initiate too, right? So when we talk about leadership, that's through our discovery and process development. We would work with leadership and management and the team to identify what those retirement rules are, right? One retirement rule is we're going to turn on metering and we're going to look at all the software that's being used and not used. And after 3 months, we're going to send them a notification that says, hey, please validate that you're using this software. And if so, hit yes and accept. If not, we're going to recover that software on this date. So there's definitely rules and automations that we can also deploy. I know it's political, but we can start working with your teams to get them into that mindset of retirement rules. Again, when we look at these kinds of programs, initially there's some audit that's itching, right? There's a large organization that's come in to do an audit. There's a situation where you're doing a true up. A lot of times we're engaged at that moment, but if you think about the overall estate of your software asset management, we can engage at any time, and the sooner is better. So we can help define all your processes, your lifecycle management, the deployment of ServiceNow, and the configuration and customization capabilities. So we have a full stack capability on our side to deploy all the ServiceNow capabilities along with DTech apps.
Perfect. Thanks, Norman. David or John, any final comments before we close it out?
No, the only thing is, so this was on, again, software asset management, but it functions the same for any and all applications. So reach out to us if you'd want a custom demo on SAM or on another application. We're happy to do so.
One last thought here. So the beauty of software asset management is built on top of, and hardware asset management is built on top of the CMDB. So the beauty of engaging at a software asset management level, we also have to optimize your CMDB at the same time. So you're going to get 2 for 1, if you will. You're going to get an optimized CMDB, and you're going to get a highly managed, secure, and defined software asset management program to include hardware asset management, right? We still have to know what hardware is going to be installed, software is going to be installed on. So, by doing software asset management, it also knocks out the lower level capabilities within ServiceNow. And then once you set up your CMDB, then that ties back to your ITSM process, which is your incident problem change processes too, right? So when a customer does call in, you'll be able to see what software they own. And in particular, you can start creating incidents or problems against the software that they're calling in on once the CMDB is intact.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. That concludes today's presentation. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. Have a great day.